author sitting by his computer. But I had a lot of help, and I put a roster of all the people that helped me in the book, and I couldn't have done it without an excellent team behind me.
That's great to hear. I was going to say, I mean, like you were saying, it took about, what, a year and a half, you said?
It took about a year and a half from the very beginning. What seemed to be a 6-month project quickly turned into a year project, and then as it got larger and larger, as far as the amount of information on each player, I had to push back the production date until early November of last year, 17.
Our guest tonight is Rich Little, author of Ones and Twos, the history of first and second picks, or NFL draft picks, from 1967 to 2017. So why 1967?
Well, 1967 was the year that there was one common draft between the AFL, the Old American Football League, and the National Football League. The AFL had been a thorn in the side of the NFL for about 10 years. They formed back in the late 50s, early 60s, and they were bidding against each other for the top players, and the AFL was getting some of the top players, like Joe Namath and people like that. And so in 67, they decided to have a common draft, although they had not merged and didn't merge until 1971. They had a common draft in 1967, so they weren't competing against each other.
Exactly, because, with competing against each other, I mean, the only thing I could figure would drive up prices and not really help anybody, other than the players, of course.
That's right. Only the players had an advantage when there was two leagues, and then when the leagues merged, you put the two leagues on an equal footing. And they had two commissioners: the American Football League and the National Football League had two commissioners. And then when they finally had the merger in '71, Pete Rozelle became the NFL commissioner.
Now, you mentioned about competing for players. Is it kind of what happened with the USFL? The one that had like Herschel Walker and the different guys? Steve Young?
Well, that was another upstart organization that got together later. But the NFL is going to have their 100th anniversary in 2022. And there was always competition between the NFL under that name and others who competed against them, often under the banner of the AFL, starting in the 1920s and again another in the 1930s and the 1940s, and they were all called the American Football League. I guess nobody put a copyright on the American Football League. And then in the 1940s, after World War II, there was another football league that Paul Brown became the coach of the Cleveland Browns, and the Cleveland Browns, and they were in a different league. And finally, in the early 1950s, the NFL took several of those teams into the NFL, and the others folded. And they were the only show in town until 1960, when the new AFL came into existence. And there's been, throughout the history of football, there's been other leagues that have tried to compete. Not very successfully, but, they had the World League of American Football, which is almost like a minor league for the NFL, and then they had Vince McMahon had that league.
Yeah, the XFL. The crazy thing is he's talking about bringing it back in like 2 years.
Yeah, that's what I heard. they're going to have a tough road to hoe because the owners of the NFL now are really entrenched and wealthy, and it's going to be hard for an upstart league to come and start again. You know, Arena Football tried to do it, and they've been moderately successful, but they certainly don't compete head to head with the NFL.
Oh yeah, and you're preaching to the choir on that one. The difficulties of arena ball. A lot of people with my organization, we ran about 3 different arena football teams, and unfortunately, it's just oh my gosh, the financial difficulties are ridiculous. Because we can find the talented players, that was never a problem. Because unfortunately, with the NFL, there's only so many teams, so there are really solid college players that don't make the NFL that end up playing overseas or in Canada, and we were able to snag up a bunch of those guys. But yeah, it's a tough road to hoe, like you were saying.
Yeah, the NFL's the big show in town.
Exactly. How does the draft shape the league? How do you feel the impact that it has on the NFL?
Well, the first few years of the NFL, the first 14 or 15 years, they didn't have a draft. And then it was a disaster because you'd have people who would play for one team, and if somebody offered them a little more money, they would go to another team during the season. There weren't contracts. There might be game contracts, but there weren't that many yearly contracts. And the rich teams and those teams that were mostly situated in larger cities seemed to have an advantage because they had more money to go out and get better players. And so the owner of the Philadelphia Eagles back in 1935 suggested that they have a draft and that the team with the worst record would have the first pick, and then it would go down, and the team with the best record for any particular year, or the champion of that particular year, would have the last pick of the first round, and then they would pick that way until all the players were gone.
Yeah,
and that started in '36, and the guy that was the very first person drafted was a guy by the name of Jay Berwanger. And Jay Berwanger was drafted by the Eagles, and they knew he was going to be difficult to sign, and so they traded him to Chicago. And George Halas was the coach and owner of the Chicago Bears, and they couldn't reach an agreement. And Berwanger never played a game in the NFL. And he was a very successful businessman, owned his own company. Those weather strips that you see in your car door between the door and the frame of the car, those were all made by Jay Berwanger Company. It was his company that made those rubber inserts go in between the door and the automobile when you close the door.
Wow, that's something different.
Yeah. There were a lot of players that back in the early days of the draft that never played football. Football was not a lucrative business to get into, and these people, most of them had graduated from college and decided that they would either, if they couldn't get into football and make money at it, they were going to go into business because that's what they went to school for. They didn't go to school to play football like today. A lot of people go primarily to college if they receive a scholarship, and their goal is to play football. But back then, their goal was not necessarily football.
Do you feel there's such thing as a draft expert? You know how a lot of the people on TV are all like, "Oh, this person knows everything about the draft." I mean, with it being such a hard thing to decipher, is there any type of science to it?
Well, at one time there seemed to be some science, but now everything, if it's driven, it's driven by computer. And so there's a computer program in many teams, and of course in my area, I'm in the Boston area, and and we look at what the Patriots do, and um, they don't do such a hard job sometimes drafting. They do have a better job signing players that have already played for somebody else and finding their talent that way. But what you can see in a college football player, there's been some college football players that are just outstanding. They go through their whole college career. There's never an injury or anything else like that. And they get in the pros, and one injury leads to another, and the next thing, a guy only plays 3 or 4 years, and they call him a bust. But and the only reason he was a bust is because of his injuries. And so that's kind of difficult. The injury situation is really difficult to predict because guys can go all the way through college and not have anything, and bingo, first game in, first season they get injured. There's a guy that played for Detroit, Charlie Rogers. He broke his collarbone the first year. Played 5 games. Next year he came back, so he was out after 5 games for the whole season. The next year he came back, he broke his collarbone again the first game of the season. And then he came back the next year, and there was a drug suspension, and he was out of football. So he only lasted 2+ years, and it was the injuries that started his downward spiral.
Yeah, it can be a tough business. I know what you mean. We're in this area. I'm from the Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky area. We had John Carter and Keely Smith and different other players that have, had those injury issues or had some type of issue that prevents them from being successful. David Pollock, who's with ESPN nowadays, unfortunately broke his neck. And then same year we had Odell Thurman, who got hooked on drugs. And yeah, you're right. It's really tough being able to draft. Being a math professor, what role does math play in your book?
Well, that's a great question. And I started this book. My son-in-law said, I got a great idea for a book, 1s and 2s, the first and second picks of the draft. And it was his idea that gave me the genesis for the book. This is my 3rd book. The ones before that, I did a fiction called Bottom of the Ninth. It was a suspense mystery about a pitcher. And the second one was, believe it or not, a story on Lizzie Borden. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Lizzie Borden case, but it's big in this area because it happened not too far from here, that her mother and father were slain, and she was indicted and went to court and was acquitted for it. It's still a big case and happened back in 1892. That was my second book. And this book, 1s and 2s, I tried to look at it from an analytical standpoint about it, and I didn't try to compare player to player or year to year. I just tried to give a biography, and we started off with a brief biography of 500 words and found out that you just couldn't. Some of these guys had careers that lasted 2,000, 2,500 words, and you just couldn't put it into one page in 500 words. So you got a guy like Peyton Manning. His career was really long, and the story of his life afterwards is interesting. And so I didn't try to limit. I finally gave up the limits, and that's why the book is as big as it is. It's 550 pages long and weighs. Of course, I'm a math teacher, so it has to weigh 3.14, which would be in pounds, but that's pi. Mm-hmm. But I did try to look at things from an analytical standpoint, and I tried to compare salaries so everybody could get an idea of what the salaries were. And that's kind of a difficult subject to get 50 years ago, but really easy to get for the last 20 years. That's documented in this websites like Sport Direct that gives all the contract information for all sports, not just for football. So that part of my math background came into it as I tried to compare salaries and how much salaries have increased. I talked with a guy who played for the 49ers, and he's from this area, and he was in the first round. His name's Ken McAfee, and he played for the 49ers for 2 years. And he said he talked to the owner. He had a good year, his second year. He talked to the owner. He said he wanted to get $105,000. And they said, we don't pay anybody but quarterbacks over $100,000. So they offered him $95,000. And he gave up football. And now he's an oral surgeon. He's been an oral surgeon now for about 30 years. And he just got out of the business, and that was back in 1982. And can you imagine these days, if you look at Jim Garofalo's contract that was announced yesterday, he's the highest paid football player with $90 million guaranteed over 3 years, 137 over 5. So things have changed as far as the price of players.
Oh, very much so. I mean, in any of the sports, it's just ridiculous now. But then again, on the other hand, if they're bringing that much money in for the owners, they do deserve their percentage.
That's for sure. And it's kind of deceiving when you read what their contract is, like when they announce what somebody's contract is, many times that's not the money that they get out of it on the bottom line. If you looked at what they really get in terms of real dollars, it can sometimes be a lot less because there's incentives involved that they either don't meet or injuries can cost them and things like that. But the guaranteed money or a signing bonus, those are real dollars. And it's still a lot of money.
Yeah, speaking of Garofalo, he lucked out with the contract deal, not just this new one, but prior to that, because he was on the Patriots for part of the season, they still had to pay him the Super Bowl and postseason bonuses.
Well, he did. He came out in real good shape. He could have gone to Cleveland, and that would have been a different story altogether. I think financially that would have been different. And of course, who wants to be a quarterback in Cleveland?
Nobody. Yeah. So you could have just said the sentence, "Who wants to be in Cleveland?" and you would have been probably pretty accurate right there.
Right.
Yeah, but we don't want to alienate any potential readers.
No, and they had some good years. Way back when they had some good years in Cleveland.
Jim Brown, Ernest Biner.
Yeah, they had some real good players. The book actually covers 51 years. 1967 to 2017 looks like 50 years, but it's actually 51. So I added an overtime in the book. The book is set up in quarters, just like a football game. And so there's 102 biographies in the book, all different guys, all number ones and number twos, and 6 of them are now deceased. So the remaining 96 are still alive.
Yeah, actually, that's really good percentage. Because if you would have asked me that, I would have guessed it would have been higher. I would have probably guessed 15 or 16 had passed, and then only 6. Wow, that's.
Yeah, and some of them, I don't know if you remember a running back named Ricky Bell. Back in, he was a number 1 pick in '77. He passed away at the height of his career in 1984. He had a skin disorder, and in rare cases it affects your heart. And he died at age 29.
Oh, dang.
And you may remember one player by the name of Eric Turner. He was a safety. He was a number 2 in 1991. He was still playing until he passed away in 2000 at age 31, and he had intestinal cancer.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So
I remember Turner. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are the two. Those are the two guys that were real young. There was also a guy. I don't know if you remember Darrell Russell Jr.
Yeah.
Now, that's fairly recent. He made the Pro Bowl a couple of times. He was number 2 in '97. He's a defensive tackle.
Yeah, he was solid. Yeah, he was a really...
Yeah, and he got into a lot of problems, suspension problems, substance abuse. So the NFL gave him time off suspension, and then one thing led to another. And he died in an automobile accident in '05. So Darrell Russell and Eric Turner and Ricky Bell are the 3 players out of the 6 that passed away at an early age. And the other 3 were, you remember Bubba Smith? Bubba Smith is the guy, he was the number 1 in '67. He played in all the Police Academy movies.
He was great, yeah.
Yeah, Moses Hightower. Mm-hmm. And then there was John Matuzak, which he was a number 1 in '73. If you ever have seen the movie Goonies.
Oh, yes, I didn't hear about that.
Kind of a cult movie. A lot of people watch that still. Well, John Matuzak was one of the lead actors in that movie. He played the character of Sloth in that movie.
Yeah, I had no idea that. I mean, because like you mentioned, Bubba Smith, we all knew Bubba played football. We all knew, Webster's dad had played football. Different ones like that. Gosh, I'm trying to think. What was he? He was known for steroids. Lou Alzada. We knew he, did football and then did the acting. But yeah, I had no idea that the fellow from Goonies, until recent, had. Yeah, actually, I've read it in your book, which was really interesting to find out that he was an ex-football player. I just thought he was just kind of some random guy in a mask, but...
Right.
Yeah.
Well, at halftime in the book, when I say we, my team and I put together a section of the actors. And everybody, you'd be surprised how many of these guys have been either in TV or in movies. It's a really large number. A guy like OJ, who was the number 1 in '69, OJ Simpson, he had a bigger career in TV and movies than he ever did in football.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean the roles that he got and just his ability to do endorsements. I mean, it was amazing.
You're right.
Yeah, unfortunately, he's once again one of those players that have had off the field issues. But I mean, his acting career was quite extensive.
Yeah, and I didn't really get into there's been books written about OJ's troubles as far as with the loss of his wife and that whole situation. There's volumes written about that, and I noted that in my book, but I didn't get deeply into it. But what was interesting on his last case, he was released almost on the same day that my book was released.
Oh, neat.
Back in October, and he was number 1 in '69. A guy by the name of George Coons was number 2 that year. And Judge Coons, after he retired, he was in Vegas, and he had a number like nearly a dozen McDonald's franchises. Mm-hmm. And he decided that he was going to get out of the hamburger business. He sold them all, and now he doesn't have anything to do. He decides to go back to law school and become an attorney. And so part of his education intention of being going back to school to be an attorney is he got assigned to assist a judge in Las Vegas. And where did he wind up? He wound up in the same place where O.J. was being held downstairs. So he was number 2, O.J. was number 1, and they were in the same building in Las Vegas.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I tried to get a hold of him at one point to have him on the show when he was still in prison, and I'd gotten the email and all address for him and all that contact info. But the crazy part was that you had to pay the people to deliver the mail.
Yeah.
Yeah, with him being a prisoner, I always thought that was interesting.
Yeah, well, I did a research book which has not come out, and it was called The Injustice of It All. It covered cases from 1630. One here near me in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and it went all the way up to 2010. And there were about 15 cases that were covered, and I had a co-author up in Canada, and she did some, and I did some, and we were going to do the interview one person who was. She went to court and lost the case and wound up in jail for conspiracy to murder her husband. She was a teacher, and she had, according to the court documents, she had a student murder her husband. And we tried to get in contact with her to see if we could interview her, and there was a charge for doing it from her agent. And we just couldn't afford to do it. So I wanted to tell her story, but you had, as you said, somebody had the hand out to see if you could. And the money was going to go to her defense fund, but I thought the way we were writing it, we were kind of defending her anyways, but we didn't do it.
I know what you mean. There's always someone wanting their palm greased.
Right.
Let's see. Tell us about your team and just their impact on the book.
Well, my team is kind of varied. 2 of them were former students of mine. I teach at a community college here in Massachusetts, and two of the people who did a lot of the research on the book, especially on the authors and the actors. We had in the middle of the book at halftime, we have a section, as I said, on all of the actors, but we also have a section on all the authors. And number 1s and number 2s have a tendency to put together books when they get through. Either they write it or they have somebody write it for them. But out of all the 1s and 2s, there are 51 different books that are out. Some are they wrote just the forward of a book, but in other books they wrote the whole book, like the Mannings. There's 3 Mannings in 1s and 2s. The 2 number 1s, Eli and Peyton, and then their dad, back in the 1970s, was a number 2. And they've written, I think 4 different books about football. And there's others throughout the 1s and 2s that have written books. So there's 51 different books that came out that are attributed to number 1 and number 2 draft picks. So being a number 1 and a number 2, it gives them a career after their football career. Mm-hmm. And it's like being in the Hall of Fame. You got guys that are in the Hall of Fame, and that's a ticket to some lucrative contracts after your career, after your sports career, both in baseball and in football. I think it opens the doors to be a number 1 and number 2. That opens the doors for other things after you retire. Just as being a Hall of Fame player opens doors.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I mean to be able to Oh gosh, that's where to mingle, to be able to communicate with somebody like that, to be able to just that access, how it opens the doors when you call.
Right. Well, looking at the Red Sox, which is the local baseball team here, we get Jim Rice works on some games, and he's a Hall of Famer, and Dennis Eckersley, who at one time pitched in Boston before he went out to Oakland, he's in the Hall of Fame, and I think that Hall of Fame really works. You asked me about my team. As I told you, my son-in-law, a guy by the name of Tony Sanagati, this is his idea, and we're going to write this together. And there was some issues. His dad is sick, and he could not be part of it. But it is his idea. I used my daughter as anytime I had a technical problem with Word or another computer program, she bailed me out on that. My granddaughter designed the front and back cover, and the cover on the book. Everybody says, "Wow, what a beautiful photograph that is." That's not a photograph. That's a drawing. And the guy who did that is down in Alabama. Boy, he'd be a good guy for you to talk to in an interview sometimes, because he does a lot of football. He has done golf as well. A lot of artwork, and those are actual drawings on the front and back cover. The front is Peyton Manning when he was playing at Tennessee. And the name of the artist is Dan Moore. He's out of Alabama.
Yeah, I mean,
excellent artist.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought they were photos at first, and then after looking at them a couple times, but yeah, they're amazing. And yeah, we would love to have him on the show. So later on, when you get a chance, if you would forward us his info, and we will definitely see about getting him on. And
yeah. His info is in the back. That was part of the deal that we had with him, is that we included his biography in the back of the book, and I think all of this information is there. I know he's got a website. We included that. The picture on the back is Cornelius Bennett. I don't know. They called him Biscuit Bennett, and that drawing is him in the game. He played for Alabama, and he's tackling number 7 in that back cover is Mark Merline, who was quarterback for Notre Dame. But that does look like a photograph. You can actually see the blur it looks just like a photograph. Terrific artist. If you look at some of his work on his website, it's just unbelievable.
Excellent. Yeah, I do look forward to checking that out. That is like you said, I mean, it is amazing art. Before we let you go, you mentioned his website. Tell us about, do you have a website or your publisher or social media that fans can learn more about your book? And
sure. This is a self-published book, and I use somebody locally. I used a lot of local companies to help me put this together and get it out. But the website of the book is www.onesandtwosbook, and you have to spell it out, ONESANDTWOSBOOK.com. And that will take you to our website. There's a video on the website, a YouTube video that we put together. Part of my team was a guy by the name of Nick Clark, who does commercial videos, and he's a local guy, and that's on the website. And of course, the book is available on Amazon.
Excellent. I would like to thank our guest, Rich Little, and enjoyed hearing about his book, Ones and Twos, The History of First and Second NFL Draft Picks from 1967 to 2017. And we definitely would love to have you back on anytime you do another sports book. If they're half as good as this, that would be amazing.
Well, James, thank you for having me on. And if you if you want to give me a call around draft time, maybe we can do a little bit of talk about that as it comes up in May.
That would be great.
Because it won't be long, and we'll be into draft again.
Oh, definitely. Got the combines coming up. Excited about that. All kinds of great NFL stuff is coming up. I know that it's the off season, but the off season can be sometimes even more exciting than the regular season.
Well, it seems as if football, especially in our area here, seems to be a 12-month-a-year interest now. Everybody seems to really be, because the Patriots having around here having a year after year that they have a pretty good team. People tend to follow it. We got a good, solid hockey team up here this year. The Bruins are doing terrific, and they hardly get a mention on sports. It's just funny how it cycles that way.
Exactly. Yeah, with NFL being the America's new pastime, it's hard to get in for some of the other sports edgewise.
It sure is.
Thank you, Rich, and definitely we'll touch back in with you.
Well, thank you, James, and thanks for having me on your show. I really appreciate it, and I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds great.